The Foreseen arcade. Active.
When Atari first released the Jaguar in 1993, it's safe to say it never stood a chance from the get-go. After all, Atari's reputation was at the rock bottom by that point, given the 1983 crash led to a lot of people losing faith and trust in the company. The 7800 lost out due to it being released 2 years after its planned 1984 release, as well as the fact that Nintendo had practically no competition whatsoever in North America, thanks to their draconian exclusivity policy for any and all third-party titles, which affected both the 7800 and its other competitor, the Sega Master System. Meanwhile, the Atari Lynx, as impressive as it was hardware-wise, wound up losing to both Game Boy and the Sega Game Gear. Given that Atari wasn't the one to throw the towel, they decided to try yet again with the Jaguar. They boasted that the Jaguar was a 64-bit system, which was supposedly 4 times more powerful than the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, or Mega Drive as we call it in Europe, as well as being twice as powerful as the new kid on the block, the 3DO interactive multiplayer. Despite boasting some pretty impressive technology for 1993, the hardware was proven to be too difficult to make games for it, with many developers going for the Motorola 68000 CPU as the basis instead. That meant that a lot of the games from third-party developers were no different than your typical 16-bit game you'd find on the Mega Drive, Amiga, and Atari ST. While the Jaguar did have a share of amazing games like Doom, Tempest 2000, Alien vs Predator, and Rayman, it wasn't enough to save the system from becoming a laughingstock of the home console market, especially with weaker games like Kasumi Ninja, Bubsy in Fractured Fairy Tales, and White Man Can't Jump being the far bigger targets for attention than anything else. The Atari Jaguar wound up selling only an estimated 150,000 units. That's less than a 3DO, and that console sold at around $699 when it came out in 1993, while the Jaguar only cost $249.99 at launch in the same year. That's when Atari introduced the Atari Jaguar CD add-on in September of 1995, in hopes to revitalize interest for their struggling console in response to the North American launch of the Sony PlayStation. The Jaguar CD add-on also came bundled with a playable demo of Myst, the soundtrack CD for Tempest 2000, and 2 retail games, VidGrid and Blue Thunder. Needless to say, the release of the Jaguar CD was too little, too late for a console that had already entered a death spiral from the very beginning. Seeing the writing on the wall, Atari finally called it quits, as the company pulled the plug and killed most, if not all, of the planned game releases and was finally out of a console market. Or at least until Atari VCS in 2021 anyway. With RetroAchievements getting support for the Jaguar CD in June of 2023, today I'll be talking about the games that got sets as part of our launch rollout. The Jaguar CD had a total of 13 games released during its commercial life, with only 4 of them getting achievement sets. The rest of the rollout sets are mainly filled with homebrew and aftermarket releases. As a matter of fact, only 14 games got sets for the rollout, 4 retail games, 5 homebrew games, 2 of which are paid homebrew, and 4 aftermarket games. So, let's take a bite out of this add-on as the Foreseen Arcade presents RetroAchievements Rollout Sets, the Atari Jaguar CD.
Hello, I'm the Negative Ion. For this section of the video, I will be talking briefly about the 3 full-motion video games featured in the Atari Jaguar CD rollout lineup on RetroAchievements. We'll start with quite possibly the most historically noteworthy of the trio due to its bold move in concept and execution for its time. Dragon's Lair, developed by Advanced Microcomputer Systems. Back in 1983, arcade games were primarily 8-bit in nature. It was a time when the fantasy of the future was greatly exaggerated, especially in the gaming side of the entertainment industry. This played a large role in the conceptualization of Dragon's Lair. Many gave it a quick glance as it was nested within several other visually minimalistic arcade games and were instantly floored by its presence. Not to mention the animation was done by the legendary Don Bluth, who made movies like The Secret of Nim, The Land Before Time, and Anastasia. The game's attract mode that would play on loop would baffle visitors as to how something that looked like a movie could exist as a video game that you could play. And it took 2 quarters to play, a first in gaming history. There really wasn't anything like it. Unfortunately, this key feature ultimately ended up being a major contributor to the game failing to stand the test of time, as it neglected the gameplay in favor of instantly grabbing everyone's attention with any single frame. The game operates as follows. As the valiant Sir Dirk the Daring, you run through a castle dodging traps and fighting monsters in an effort to rescue Princess Daphne from the evil dragon Singe. Each room basically serves as its own level of sorts. You have a joystick and a single attack button. The intention is that you would use the visual cues in the animation to figure out which direction to move in relation to Sir Dirk's position, or when to use his sword, whether it be through a flashing object or how hazards are laid out in the moment, amongst a few other things. On paper, there are a decent variety of tells that try to communicate to the player what to do. The biggest problem with this game, however, is that it hardly gives enough time to figure out which is the correct input, and there are some tells that just don't do a good job hinting at what the correct input is or when to act, leading to essentially just memorizing everything being the better option and just knowing all the inputs ahead of time. It's definitely a product of its time and has not aged well because of it. In November of 1995, a port to the Atari Jaguar CD was published by ReadySoft, and there are some substantial differences between the 2 versions. For example, in the arcade game, rooms would be shuffled after entering the castle on every playthrough and every time you die. In the Jaguar CD version, you play every room in the game in a fixed order and they're all grouped into different stages. In addition, dying will simply have you restart the room that you're currently in, and continuing will take you back to the beginning of the stage you're currently on. It doesn't really add any extra features, it just changes how you progress, along with giving you infinite continues. While I was playing this version, the game crashed very often, and given what I read in the comments and forum on the game's RetroAchievements page, it seems like I'm not the only one, so approach this version with caution. Speaking of RetroAchievements, I'll briefly touch on the achievement set as well. Along with basic progression, there are achievements that require completing specific sets of rooms back-to-back without dying, beating the game without using a continue, and encountering specific death animations. The set as a whole is very basic for the most part, but for a game like this, there's not really a whole lot that you can do, since being good just means knowing and executing every single input in one go. Next up is Space Ace, the follow-up to Dragon's Lair. It saw a limited release in arcades in December of 1983 and a wider release in April of the following year. You play as the dashing space hero, Dexter, who goes by the pseudonym Ace. While protecting Kimberly from an alien attack issued by Commander Borth, Dexter gets shot by the Infanto Ray, turning him into his younger, scrawnier self, which allows the aliens the opportunity to kidnap her. Now Dexter has to chase after them in his adolescent state to rescue her and defeat the invading armada to save the human race. The controls are pretty much the same as Dragon's Lair, 4 directions and an attack button. But the main addition to this game in comparison is the multiple choice feature presented throughout many of its scenes, allowing the player to choose which door or path to go through, or utilize the option to energize and temporarily reverse the Infanto Ray's effects, which has its own unique scenes to play through and also involves much more frequent use of the attack button. Unfortunately, the issues are also pretty much the same as Dragon's Lair, too little time to react and some instances where the correct input is unclear. The Atari Jaguar CD port was released by ReadySoft in January of 1996, and the changes made in this version are just all over the place. In the arcade version, you were able to choose which room to enter, and anytime you made an error and lost a life, you'd continue the game past said error. In this version, the error margin for mistimed inputs is much more generous, but the trade-off is that when you die, you start the whole scene from the beginning, including any dialogue or pre-scene setup. Plus the way that you progress through a few scenes are, well, inconsistently different. For example, in the opening level of the arcade original, you can play through the second half of it as either the adolescent or energized versions of Dexter. On the Jaguar CD, however, you have to play through the energized segment, then the younger Dexter segment immediately afterwards. Oh, and it also crashes a lot, and yeah, it happens to many other achievement hunters as well. Lovely. The achievement set for this game is also pretty basic, but it does take advantage of the multiple choice feature. There are achievements that require playing through the whole game in one go as both versions of Dexter individually, along with finding specific death animations in almost every scene. Again, not much you can do for a game like this, so I can forgive it. Fast forward to March of 1996, where we come to quite possibly the most mechanically ambitious of this trio, Brain Dead 13, developed and produced by ReadySoft. Unlike the previous two games, this one originated as an MS-DOS title the year before and then was ported to other platforms like the 3DO and the PlayStation. It was quite the conceptual evolution of the FMVG genre. The story is that the evil Dr. Nero Neurosis is planning to take over the world, but needs the help of someone with mechanical know-how. And hands. So he calls a mechanic named Lance Galahad to fix up his machine, who then later learns of his plans and soon thereafter finds himself being the only hope for the world and escapes into the depths of the castle. Since the evil doctor also wants to get out of having to pay Lance for his work, he sends his most loyal servant, Fritz, to hunt down and kill the mechanic before he can stop his plans. That's where you come in. Despite having similar controls to Dragon's Lair and Space Ace, this is a much more open-ended FMV game where you can freely travel around the castle. As Lance, the main objective is to defeat the 5 monstrous residents that occupy the castle, like a sports-obsessed Frankenstein monster and a vampire who runs a funeral salon, and you're able to confront them in any order at all. After doing so, you'll finish things off with a final showdown against Fritz and Dr. Nero. Much like Dragon's Lair and Space Ace, the issues remain the same. Many situations where there's too little time to react and the hints for correct inputs aren't clear or even unorthodox. In fact, one could argue that they're even less clear than the previous two games since they at least have objects flashing. The only attempt at a counterbalance is the fact that you have infinite lives, but since you have to sit through unskippable death animations for even longer than the Don Bluth games, this is hardly a compromise. Unless you want to count the level of violence that the death scenes manage to get away with in a game that's rated KA. I mean, look at some of the... Jesus! And that's despite there not being a lick of blood or gore anywhere in the whole game, but my god, some of these are pretty damn brutal. You can't help but wonder if this was a test to see just how gruesome you can get without crossing that age rating line. Kinda goes to show how much of a wild west of gaming we used to live in. Well, anyway, in the Atari Jaguar CD version, the quality of the videos have seen a dip for the worst, but the timing windows for inputs are much more reasonably set compared to something like the PlayStation version. However, you're not able to remap the controls, but for a game like this, I don't see why you would need to. And surprise, surprise, it also crashes very frequently on BizHawk. As for the achievement set, it also has a handful of deathless without pausing and death hunting achievements, but it also manages to fit in a few extra challenges, including passing through both entrances of all the rooms that have them. In conclusion, these games aren't exactly good for playing as much as they're just fascinating to observe. They were made to stand out with their visual flair on the surface by taking advantage of everyone's preconceived notions of the future of gaming, but ultimately ended up suffering in the gameplay department as a result. They're not really good games as much as they're good, shall we say, museum exhibits, relics of a time where gaming was trying to use a fantasized portrait of the future to revolutionize the industry only to fall flat on their faces. There was an announcement for the Jaguar CD version of Dragon's Lair 2 Time Warp, but it never came to fruition, more than likely due to the console's life being cut short. It really sucks that these games couldn't stand the test of time because they can work as games. The facets of good game design in the genre are there, they just need to fix the two main issues that I mentioned multiple times, and you could have something that not just actually works, but also doesn't make the players feel like they have to read a guide ahead of time. Of course, the easy way is to just have a hint system that explicitly tells you which button to push like many of the later ports have done, but that kinda defeats the purpose of the animation's attempts of encouraging observational on-the-fly deductions. It's almost like taking a math test that just tells you the answers, except in this case, the questions don't provide you with enough information to reasonably come to the correct conclusion, and you're only given 5 seconds to answer each one, so you're just having to rely on guessing instead. Why wouldn't you look at the answers in that case?
Looking at a retail game that isn't an interactive movie, Baldies is a real-time strategy game that first came out on the Jaguar CD in 1995. While the Jaguar CD version was the first release, the game later received ports for Windows, DOS, PlayStation, and Sega Saturn. While the latter two versions did get a Japanese release under the name Baldyland, the PlayStation version was brought to the West in 2003, with the US version being handled by ZeniMax Media under the Mud Duck Productions label, while Phoenix Games handled the distribution in Europe. Developed by Creative Edge Software, the premise follows an all-out war between the titular Baldies and their rivals, the Harrys. In each stage, you start off with a small number of Baldies. You construct buildings that are needed for increasing your population and making some creative weapons. There are 4 classes of Baldies: builders, who are needed for construction and keeping the buildings from falling apart; scientists, which are needed for research and for deploying the traps; soldiers, who can attack the Harrys and their houses directly; and workers, who also serve as breeders. The game has 100 levels set across 5 locations, from the nice and calm plains, the chilly Arctic, the wacky circus, the hot and sandy desert, all the way to the actual hell. According to Moby Games, the game received an average score of 67% when all platforms are accounted for, but the Jaguar CD version stands at a 64% rating with 7 critic reviews overall. For a Jaguar CD game, Baldies actually had a rather warm reception, with 4 reviews being at a 70% range. Electronic Gaming Monthly, or EGM, gave the Jaguar CD version a 34 out of 40 in their March 1996 issue, stating that while it looks like a shallow puzzle game at a glance, in actuality it is a challenging strategy-based title that incorporates a little humor and a lot of planning. The review also goes to mention that dropping skunks in the enemy base and launching surprise attacks by concealing troops in trees are just some of the high points in one challenging stage of Baldies. While EGM was positive on the game, with GamePro and ST Magazine being in agreement in 1996, Video Games and Computer Entertainment gave it an okay score of 6 out of 10 in their January issue of that year. The Video Game Critic, on the other hand, gave it a 16 out of 100 in their retro review from 2007, who had this to say in the conclusion. This game has a major learning curve, but since the action unfolds at a snail's pace, there's plenty of time to figure out what's going on. Not only it is time consuming to develop your tribe, but it's boring too. I completed the first few stages of Baldies for the sake of this review, but I'm not convinced it was worth my time. There are dozens of stages in the game, but you only unlock one at a time. Advanced levels promise harsher environments, vehicles, and sophisticated traps, but the amount of work required to see all the good stuff will be painstaking. You really have to fall in love with this game to see all it has to offer, but there is no chance of that happening. The set itself contains a whopping 104 achievements worth 674 points, and mastering the set is super simple. Just clear all 100 levels and create large mines, pits, catapults, and electrocutions. You will just need to have the patience to master it though. It is a real-time strategy game after all, so try not to make any bold moves. As I said in the beginning of the video, only 4 out of 13 retail games got a set during the Jaguar CD's commercial life. So the majority of what you'll see afterwards in this video are homebrew and aftermarket games. First we have Frog Feast, released in August 20th, 2007 and developed by Rastersoft. First launched at both Classic Gaming Expo 2005 and VGXPO Dallas events on the same day, the game itself is a clone of an Intellivision game, Frogball, also known as Frogs and Flies in its Atari 2600 equivalent, as the aim is to eat as many flies as possible before the time runs out. The aim is to finish the game with more eaten flies than your opponent. What's interesting is that Frog Feast was a multi-platform project, and it was also ported to a lot of retro consoles, including the Mega CD, Neo Geo CD, the Sharp X 68000, Sega Mega Drive, Super Nintendo, the Sega Dreamcast, Amiga CD32, Philips CDI, and even FM Towns Mati. As a matter of fact, the game also has a set for the regular Atari Jaguar version, as well as being one of the games to get an achievement set for Oozebox, whose rollout is a topic for another day. With 10 achievements worth 23 points, this is an easy mastery, as you need to get a score of 60 during a round, winning a game for the first time, winning without touching the water, getting a score of 15 in 30 seconds or less, as well as getting a score of 20 before nightfall. For our next homebrew, we are looking at not one, not two, but 3 Jaguar CD games developed by Reboot, starting with SuperFly DX. Released on May 18, 2010, SuperFly DX is an endless runner, where you need to avoid crashing into obstacles, the ground, or the roof. At first, you only have free flight and hunter modes, but as you progress through the game, you will unlock other modes and settings by reaching a required amount of total distance achieved. As this set has 18 achievements worth 183 points, reaching the total distance of 68,000 unlocks the SuperFly story. This mode is important, as you need to beat all 4 worlds in that mode to consider the game beaten. For mastery, you'll also need to unlock other modes and options, as well as obtaining pickups and reaching a distance in a single run. Another title from Reboot, this time we have Kobayashi Maru Final. Released on November 27, 2012, this is essentially a clone of Konami's Time Pilot, where you destroy enemy forces on each stage. It's a simple shoot 'em up, but a pretty hard one. The set has 12 achievements worth 113 points, with the beat condition simply requiring you to clear level 4. However, you'll be needing to beat level 8 and reach a score all the way up to 300,000 points to get a mastery. And watch out for the recycled power achievement, as this is the only missable achievement in the set, which requires you to save up 5 lives at once. Our third and last encounter with Reboot on the video is Full Circle Rocketeer, released on June 8, 2013. As it's basically a Jaguar CD clone of Jetpack, anyone who played the original ZX Spectrum game, be it on the actual hardware or as part of Rare Replay on Xbox One, should be familiar with the basics. Collect the rocket pieces, collect fuel for the said rocket, and escape the planet, while also blasting everything in sight along the way. The set has 18 achievements worth 266 points. Besides beating all 10 levels, you will also need to complete levels 1 through 5 without dying, getting high scores, completing levels 1 through 10 on hard, collecting all Reboot letters, and reaching the maximum amount of lives. Next up, we have one of the 2 paid homebrew games for the Rollout, both of which were developed by Orionsoft. Released for the Jaguar CD on August 3, 2014, Elansar is a point-and-click adventure game that's clearly inspired by the likes of Myst, where you explore the island and solve puzzles to uncover its mystery. This one was a pain to deal with for the video, as although it is available physically, there was a big problem. You cannot get the Jaguar CD version digitally anymore. Seriously, that version was removed from the game's itch.io page, and the same thing happened to its Dreamcast version. The footage you see here is from the Steam version, because there was practically no possible way to get the Jaguar CD footage properly. After I made contact with OrionSoft on Facebook, I got a confirmation behind the delistings. According to the developer, the rights to the Jaguar, both on cartridge and CD, and Dreamcast versions were bought up by another company. But who bought the rights is beyond me, so fellow Atarians, let me know in the comments if you can track down who actually owns the rights to the Jaguar and CD ports. As far as the set is concerned, it has 8 achievements worth 32 points. All you need to do is to just beat the game. To all 13 users on RetroAchievements who were lucky enough to get a hold of a Jaguar CD version, I salute you. Released on February 8, 2015, Jagmatch is a small homebrew game from Sebastian Mihai that's a simple game of memory, where you match the game screenshots to the Atari system they're from. And, well, that's all there is to it. What else is there for me to say? This set has 6 achievements worth 30 points, and all achievements involve clearing around in different ways, like moving only diagonally or in under 20 moves. KLAX had quite a lot of ports for many platforms, given the game's popularity in the arcades. On RetroAchievements, we have sets for both the NES and Amstrad CPC ports. But unlike those two versions, Serrano J's Jaguar CD version, which came out on February 16, 2015, wasn't developed from the ground up. What we're actually dealing with here is a Jaguar CD conversion of the Atari ST port, which was originally developed in 1990 by Tech Software Development, later known as Chrysalis Software. Since RetroAchievements doesn't have proper support for it, this might be the closest we can get to having support for Atari SD games. The set contains 44 achievements worth an impressive 615 points, meaning it shares the same honor as Baldies for having the set worth the most points, though the latter still remains on top regarding the amount of achievements in the set. Clearing 100 stages is what's needed for beating this one. For mastery, you will need to earn combos as well as using a wildcard tile. Make sure you check the game's forum topic on the combos. Also, during my recording, there was an issue when playing it on BizHawk, as when you get the game over and reach a high score, the game will crash, preventing you from using the few continues the game has to offer. BizHawk recently got a new update at the time of recording, so hopefully this should fix the crashing, making it possible to beat it properly. Developed by Wave 1 Games and released on June 23, 2017, Fast Food 64 is a remake of an Atari 2600 game from 1982 by Telesis. Like in the original, you control a mouth and you have to eat food that is flying at you, while avoiding purple pickles. Swallow 6 purple pickles and it's game over. In a remake, you can play both the classic mode, the new 2000 mode, and even a secret VR beef mode. This set has 14 achievements worth 74 points, as mastery will involve consuming a lot of calories on modes 1, 3, 4, and 5, as well as consuming a number of calories without eating any purple pickles. If you still feel peckish after mastering this set, then you should also try mastering the set for its Christmas-themed follow-up, Fast Food 64 Holiday Snacks. Alice's Mom's Rescue is another paid homebrew from OrionSoft, this time a 2D platformer released for the Jaguar CD on 10th of December 2018. This is pretty much the same situation as Elansar that I've talked about earlier. Orionsoft sold the rights for the Jaguar and Jaguar CD ports to a different company who we still don't know who it is, so the digital versions of those ports were delisted off of itch.io. Unlike Elansar, you can still get the Dreamcast version digitally via the itch.io. While both have physical releases, you will have to sell both arms, legs, and kidneys to even afford the scalper level prices on eBay, including shipping and import taxes in some regions. So once again, I had to turn to the Steam version for the footage. And yes, the game has a set for both cartridge and CD releases, so that's a double whammy in terms of availability headaches, and frankly, it just ain't worth it. The set for the Jaguar CD version has 50 achievements worth 155 points, and all of them simply ask you to complete every level, be it normally or with a perfect rating. And what is perhaps the most anticlimactic way to end this video, we have Ants, developed by Chris Reed and Jeffrey Johnson on February 28, 2018. In this game, you control a hand and you squish ants with your finger, while avoiding fire ants, wasps, and other insects that will harm you. The set has 14 achievements worth 169 points, with achievements ranging from unlocking modes, beating stages, hitting certain bugs, as well as beating normal and finger gun modes. And with that, we reach the end of the Jaguar CD rollout video. I was honestly disappointed we didn't see other games in the retail library getting a set, but the aftermarket games more than made up for it, except for Orionsoft games, given the situation regarding the Jaguar CD versions. And I would like to thank the Negative Ion for making a guest segment that covered Dragon's Lair, Space Ace, and Braindead 13. I really recommend you follow him on Twitch, subscribe to his YouTube channel, and maybe join his official Discord group. To all fellow Atarians who watched through the video legitimately, thank you so much for watching. What do you think of the games that were part of the rollout? Any particular favorites? What other games do you wish had an achievement set for Atari Jaguar CD? Let me know in the comments if you have any answers. As always, I'll see you next time on the Foreseen Arcade.